chick lit, mommy porn. Whatever you want to call it, erotic writing has been around since the beginning of time. The modern romance novel owes its roots to the bodice ripper style of the 1970s, beginning with The Flower and the Flame, released in 1972, which many believe to be the first romance novel. Although these books may not pass the test these days when it comes to things like consent, they were the first to show on the page that even a good woman can want sex, revolutionary at the time. And romance novels remain one of the few forms of sexually explicit material that aren't marketed primarily to straight cis men. Now, romance novels have changed a lot since the 1970s, so I'd like to explore that using what I've termed the 3 C's: consent, communication, and character. The first C. When you're reading a novel, the author has chosen to write from a specific point of view. First person, third person, omniscient or not. Most romance novels are written from the first person point of view, meaning you are the main character. You know their thoughts, you know their feelings, you understand what they understand. You're seeing through their eyes. And in the context of erotic scenes, that means you know exactly how much they consent and exactly how informed that consent is. There's no guessing based on body language or implications, how invested they are in that scene, like in a visual porn. Those boundaries are clear, and when boundaries are clear, everything else is up on the table. So erotic books, romance novels, are free to explore some of the more taboo or kinky. Many romance novels use what is called a split POV, meaning you're not just in the head of one character, you're in the head of 2, maybe 3, maybe more, depending on the book you're reading. And that means consent is never questioned. Consent is so clear in written media because it's on the page, whether in explicit description or dialogue. And in modern romance novels, a lot of that dialogue is around the topic of safe sex. Condom usage is clear in a novel. A good writer wouldn't leave that out. And research, like the study by Rader, Hovick, and Bigsby that I've linked below, shows that media that models condom usage and conversations around safe sex increases condom usage in those who have consumed that media. Now, some of the most popular romance novels are not exactly the best examples of clear consent and communication. You guessed it, I'm talking about 50 Shades of Grey. But these books show exactly how POV makes consent very clear. For example, when reading these books, we know exactly what Anastasia knows, which isn't much, and we know that she isn't consenting so much as performing an emotional negotiation with a man who is in need of a lot of therapy. But 50 Shades of Grey did bring a lot of conversation into the zeitgeist around topics such as consent, communication, and BDSM. I'll give it that. It was the Helen of Troy of romance novels, launching 1,000 think pieces on our next C, communication. Modern romance novels include explicit communication, as we've discussed before, including around both the physical and the emotional aspects of sex. They're romance novels. By nature of being a romance novel, they romanticize every aspect of a relationship that's relevant to the plot, at least, including what we would generally consider mood killer conversations. They turn these mood killers into something sexy, and that stays relevant beyond the plot of the novel. This is intimate and vulnerable and difficult to talk about, so having examples of how to have these difficult conversations can provide accessible templates that you can implement in your own life. Don't know how to bring up condoms? Read a romance novel. Don't know how to describe your sexuality? Read a romance novel. Just leery of talking about sex or feelings in general? Read a romance novel. For example, take this scene from Not My Type, featuring Frankie, a wheelchair-using sexologist doing research on accessible role play for her podcast, Jay, her hunky rigging partner who can't be tied down, and Leah, the owner of the kink club where these accessible rope play classes are taking place. We're going to walk through the things I need to know, and which Frankie wants me to know, before we get started. Like I've said, before you begin a scene, understanding how to engage in safe, consensual, enjoyable play is essential. Here at the club, we call it the A-list. A-list? Frankie asked, raising an eyebrow, a small smile playing on her ruby red lips. Answer list. or access list, however you want to describe it. It's essential to a good scene. Leah dimmed the room lights until a single circle illuminated the mats, the rest of the room in shadow. So, Frankie, I said, beginning the negotiation, would you prefer to use your chair during scenes? She hesitated, her fingers flexing. What are my options if I don't? I gestured at Leah. In a scenario where people prefer not to use their equipment, we get them onto the floor or a soft surface. You want a place where people are less likely to injure themselves if they fall. In this scenario, we'd ask you to start on the mats. Leah would be the spotter or chaperone, and I'd be the rigger. My job is to look after the ropes, and your pleasure. Leah's job is to ensure you're supported and to assist me if I need. I grunt. It's easier for two people to support a passed out from pleasure person than one. I found myself enjoying Frankie's flush, relishing her bold gaze as she offered me a flirty smile. All right, let me get on the mat. She transitioned from her chair onto the floor, settling in the middle of the space, adjusting until her legs stretched out in front of her. Like this? I nodded, beginning to slowly circle her. Perfect. What happens if there are only two of you? She nodded toward Leah. No chaperone? You need to be extra careful. You use different ties or supports like yoga bolsters or blocks. Everything is about the bunny and their experience. Our gazes caught, held. In her eyes, I read something I'd sorely missed. Trust. What's next? She asked, her voice catching. Level of sensuality or sexuality would be our next question. I might say, are you okay with kissing? Frankie hesitated, slowly nodding. What about sexual touching? For example, if I do a certain type of harness, I might need to move your breasts, which I can achieve in a perfunctory manner, or I can touch you in a way that adds to your pleasure. Her breath caught, a flush of arousal coloring her cheeks. I'm good with sensual. Fuck. I nodded, my blood beginning to thicken. How about sensitive areas, or areas where you have no feeling? Is there anything I should know about or look for? She ran a hand down her body, stopping a fraction above her abdomen. I've limited feeling from here down, so any stimulation needs to be on the rough side. Double fuck. I ignore the desire now burning in my gut. Noted. And no movement or feeling in my upper thighs. I made a mental note to use loose ties on her legs. Any areas I should avoid? She shook her head. That's all. Because this is the first time we're working together. For this scene, we'll keep your clothes on. If you want to change that next time, we'll renegotiate. See, that's the thing. Pretty much anything you're into will show up in a romance novel. You can find your niche. My introduction to romance novels came from the writing side of it. My undergraduate degree is in creative writing and French. No, my father was not impressed by my choices. But I learned about romance novels as a means of making a quick buck while you were doing your real writing. Because 5 to 10 years ago, when I was doing my undergraduate degree, the whole genre existed of formulas. You went to a publisher and they gave you cowboy plus baker plus New York City and you filled in the blanks. But the genre has blossomed with creativity since then. And whatever you're into, I promise you, there's something in the romance section for you. That leads me to my third scene, character. The romance genre has blossomed into probably the most inclusive form of writing you can find, especially in a conventional bookstore. It takes on what happens after that rom-com kiss. It deals with the complexities of human relationships, and it's inclusive in many ways. I have friends who've discovered their sexuality through reading romance novels because conversations about, say, demisexuality are not common in popular media. And it's the most diverse genre when it comes to physical bodies as well. By virtue of the genre, all bodies that are described as beautiful and sexy and desirable, including those that are fat, disabled, trans, giant blue aliens. But that's a conversation for another time. This can be really important representation for those whose bodies have existed in media and in social consciousness as a dichotomy of sexless versus fetishized. And this is what I mean when I say that you can find what you're looking for in a romance novel. You're not just finding what you're attracted to, but you're finding yourself represented in a world where representation for the everyday person isn't very common. If you're interested in learning more about romance novels as a whole, you can check out the resources I used for this presentation linked below. And if you're interested in recommendations for a romance novel to read yourself, I've also linked Vulture's list of the best romance novels of 2021, which includes storylines like workplace enemies to lovers, BDSM kink clubs, retellings of Jane Austen, rock stars, and my next read, Neon Gods, which is a retelling of Persephone and Hades, and is unspeakably hot, according to Entertainment Weekly. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And if you have any feedback, I'd greatly appreciate it. And apologies if this painting of my cat has been staring into your soul the entire video. Bye.